he is very much what Simba would have been without Mufasa's guidance, which is what I think makes him such an interesting villain. Because Simba sees the throne as power. You can do whatever you want. And Scar is the termination of that. He is the adult who's been given that power, and yet he has none of the good morals and ideas that have been instilled in Simba by Mufasa, which is why I think he's such a good counter to Simba, because he represents what Simba would have been.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, and today we have back with us one of our favorite co-hosts, Andrew, to review an absolute legendary classic with us today. That's right, we are talking about The Lion King, the original The Lion King, which was a movie that was released on June 15th of 1994, so older than I am, but there's a reason it's still sticking around. So the story was actually written by a large group of people, so I'm not going to read the whole list of those people, but the screenplay was by Irene Mecchi, Jonathan Roberts, and Linda Wolverton, and it was directed by Roger Allers and Rob Minkoff. So just getting into the overall broad brushstrokes of this film, Andrew, what is your impression of the original The Lion King?
It's a good movie. It's a kid's movie, but it's done well. And it is done in the days when Disney actually had original ideas, so we appreciate that.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not something that has faded over time. It's actually continued to be one that we know and is well beloved overall. I mean, there's a lot of interesting notes just about how well this film did, both at its time and even today, how well it's accoladed. I mean, it grossed $763 million worldwide when it was first released, which means it was the highest grossing film in 1994. And at that time, it was the second highest grossing film of all time, just behind Jurassic Park. So, huge film of the day. And it was the highest grossing animated film until Finding Nemo came out. So, you know, it stuck around for a while and then received 2 Academy Awards. It received a Golden Globe. It's in the U.S. National Film Registry. It's got all the accolades, right? And then there's TV shows and movies that came out of it, all that stuff. Even the remake that was more animated, realistic looking animals. You know, there's all sorts of stuff that's come out of this one story. So there is a lot that's pushing it forward into the social conscience that we have today. And there's good reason for that. So that's what we're going to discuss today. But if you have been living under a rock and don't know what The Lion King is about, Andrew, can you give everyone that 30-second summary just so they're caught up to speed?
This movie follows the tale of Simba, the son of the king Mufasa, and the betrayal that follows his father's death and the usurpation of power by his uncle Scar, and the journey that Simba goes on in life, kind of running from that responsibility that he once had and wanted so desperately, and then him finally coming into his own at the end of the movie and reclaiming the throne from his uncle.
Yep, that's it. That's the whole thing. Yeah.
And there's a whole lot more.
Nice. Now, we use a 9 points rating system to review this film. Andrew, what did you get off the 9 points rating system for The Lion King?
I kind of want you to go first this time.
You always want me to go first.
Yes, it's true, but I don't always get my way.
Go ahead, Andrew. What'd you get?
I gave it a 7.7.
Oh, wow. Okay. I thought you were going to give it much higher based off of the inklings I got from you. Personally, I gave it a 7.45. So,
wow, we were both very close.
Yes, very close. It's a solid movie. You know, a 7.5 or higher is beyond acceptable. It is amazing.
Yeah.
And I think there's good reason for that. So we'll get into that today. But Andrew, we always start this review off by talking about how the movie started out, right? The opening of the film. What was your thoughts on that first initial scene with the music and the dramatic flourish of all the animals arriving at Pride Rock to see the newborn son of the King Mufasa.
Ah! I'm not going to lie. I heard that go off, and my immediate thought was, well, it's time for Arendelle to wake up.
As a context for you, that's my roommate's ringtone that he wakes up to in the
Although,
morning.
you know what else I think was really funny is the irony that played on a different podcast and not this podcast.
Yeah, I know.
That was the sneak peek for this one.
Yeah, exactly. Just getting you all prepared for that moment, that glorious moment. Yeah.
But no, I mean, in all honesty, it's a very memorable movie. I've probably seen this movie 24 times at this point, especially with how many siblings I have and how many of them got to the age where they're watching like older Disney movies. Like this is a very nostalgic scene. It's a very memorable scene, and I think they're able to do a lot with just that one musical number. They establish this is the kingdom of Pride Rock. This is the current ruler. This is his heir. This is their little ceremony to recognize this newborn. You establish the characters of Rafiki, Mufasa, Simba, Sarabi. I'm forgetting the bird's name right now.
Zazu.
Zazu. Yeah, Zazu. So, I mean, they do a very swift introduction, and it's a good musical number. So,
Yep. I mean, honestly, I thought that it's one of the better openers, not just for a musical, but in general. And part of it is because, and this is a perfect example for the people who wrote Joker Folie à Deux, but this one actually has a musical number that means something. All right? This musical number not just like shows what's going on, but it presents even the philosophy of the world that they're in today, where they talk about the circle of life and like everything contributes to everything else, and the whole body and framework that Mufasa works under is encompassed in this song. At the same time, the animals aren't just prancing around, they're actually going somewhere. They're going to the introduction of the new son of the king, and it has a meaning for us understanding contextually what's going on. Okay, this is a kingdom, and we see that all of the animals respect this lion who is their ruler and the new son in the family, right? All of this stuff you can pick up from just what's going on screen. So this all had meaning versus, as we've talked about on the podcast, the Joker musical numbers didn't contribute to the story at all, and nothing progressed, and it was just a mind-bending WTF moment. So we are very much not going to go into that anymore, but suffice it to say is like they did amazing, especially in contrast to other things that are out recently. Not much more to say on that point, but you get introduced to the main character, which is important, right? As a baby, you get this character Simba, who is the main protagonist of the film. And then from there, he is a child who is being raised by his father. What was your thoughts on the introduction of Simba and his growth as a character throughout this film?
I mean, I think they do a good job of creating this little dynamic he has. He's raised with the full awareness that he is meant to be king one day. In his mind, that is the greatest thing that could ever happen to him. And in his mind, being king means having power, which is a very simplistic view, but he's a kid, so it makes sense. You have this dynamic with his dad. I think they do pretty good. I don't know how far into the movie you want me to go with that dynamic.
I mean, I think if you see it as an important contribution to the film, it's definitely worth going into.
I mean, if we're just going to talk about Simba as a whole here and talk about him like pre-adult Simba, like just the time we see Simba as a kid, I think there are a couple of very interesting points that are worth taking note of. First is just his attitude towards the kingship, and that is in the words of the song, he cannot wait to be king. And it couldn't come any sooner. And then you have his relationship with his dad. And I think they do a really good representation of what that relationship should look like, which is it's very different than what you're going to see in a lot of Disney movies today, where or even some of the Disney movies that came out before, where the relationship with the father is a very almost tenuous one. It's not a healthy one, or the father is made out to be wrong in some instances. But the Lion King, one of the things that's so unique about it is Mufasa is the good guy. He is the father figure that Simba needs him to be, which is why the removal of Mufasa from this movie is such a key element, because it is the challenge that Simba now has to deal with, because the rock that he had, the king, the dad that was there for him when he needed him to redirect him when he messed up, to guide him in the way that he should be going, is gone. At least in his mind, he is gone until he takes acid. But
Yeah.
he gets high with a monkey.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think my point here is just, I think the best representation of that is when he goes to the elephant graveyard and Mufasa corrects him, and it's very stern but loving correction. And it ends with that kind of warm embrace that is his father's, and it's like this comfort for him. And even though there's this sense that you get from Simba where it's like, oh no, I'm in trouble, he's not necessarily scared of his dad. He's scared because he did something wrong and he knows there should be a consequence for it. And you get that because as soon as they're done talking, he's very comfortable with his father. There's no sort of like, oh, I'm terrified of being around him. Like he loves his dad. He would spend every minute with his dad if he could. And you also get that from the scene when he goes to wake up his dad. He's like, come on, let's go. I just want to, you promised. And so it's this very a great relationship he has with his dad. And he very much looks up to him. So there's the relationship with his dad. That's very key in Simba's character. And I think it's done very, very well. And before I move on, I don't know if you wanted to comment on that or not.
No, I mean, the only thing that I would note about that in regards to especially how the story as a whole is told, and this is one of the, I think, one of the most impressive things about The Lion King in my mind is that they tell you all this in the span of 3 scenes, because that's pretty much all you get with Mufasa and Simba before they have the stampede in the gorge. And it's impressive that they condense so much in so little. And that's just because this story and all the dialogue and everything that goes on is very tight. Everything in this film, especially the dialogue, has a purpose, either to entertain you through being humorous or some other form, or to drive the plot forward, right? And so with these characters, you get a lot about you really understand what Mufasa stands for and who he is and the kind of father he is in the span of like 2 scenes, right? Or 3 scenes. And that's pretty much all you get of their interactions, but it's very powerful and very strong to show you what kind of characters they are. And that just goes to the storytelling in this film about how well they convey things and how tightly knit and well packed together everything in this film is. And I can't think of, oftentimes you can look at a film, especially modern films that are like 2.5 hours long, and go, oh my goodness, you really didn't need that. You could just cut that out. In this movie, I can't think of a single thing that they should have cut out. You can maybe make the argument they could have added this or added that, but like honestly, everything is so tightly done and so well done that you don't get that at all. And so it's just another nod to the writers that it's like, good job. You guys wrote a story that was told very well, and you get all of these ideas that you, Andrew, were just talking about in the span of 3 scenes.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the thing that's cool is it's only an hour and a half long, and that's with the like end credits scene. And this is just, I mean, I would say it should be a well-deserved smack in the face to directors who give us like these 2.5 hour movies, and it's like, bro, what are you doing?
Right.
There's stuff in here so much we didn't need, and yet in 2.5 hours you weren't able to accomplish the goals that a movie should be accomplishing.
Right.
And yet this children's movie made now 30 years ago accomplished all of those in less than half the time. What are you doing with yourself? What, you don't deserve to be making movies. Like go find a different profession, buddy.
Right.
And so, I mean, staying along the lines of like Simba's character, you have his relationship then with his uncle Scar, who, in his mind, is not as great as his dad, but he's pretty great. Like, he is another male figure in his life, and I think the reason this movie does so well is because it's a very accurate depiction, even though they're using lions, of how men and boys and people truly interact and perceive other individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And Simba, when he's a child, is meant to be like a 6, 7, 8, maybe 10-year-old child.
Mm-hmm.
And little boys, when they're that young, they very much look up to adult male figures. And
Mm-hmm.
they don't have the knowledge of, like, Scar is a piece of crap in this movie. Like, he
Right.
doesn't care about Simba, but Simba has no
Mm-hmm.
idea. He just
Right.
sees him as this epic male figure, and he's like, this is the type of guy I want to be. My dad
Mm-hmm.
and Scar are those role models for me. And so you can tell, like, he has, like, what, 2 interactions where he's messing with his uncle Scar, and he kind of sees Scar as his cool uncle.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's like, you don't really follow the rules, but I kind of vibe with that.
Right.
Because he doesn't follow the rules either. He's like a child.
Yeah.
And you even get, like, I mean, we'll talk about Mufasa and Scar's characters individually later, but, like, you get, like, even Mufasa doesn't really bring Simba in on how he has to deal with his uncle.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Simba is just this, and the best way I can put it is he's just completely oblivious to almost all that's going on around him.
Mm-hmm.
And Mufasa is that protective shield, and you even get that when they're talking. And he goes, "I was scared today," and he's like, "What were you scared of?" "I was scared I was going to lose you."
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, I mean, I think, yeah, I didn't time it, but I think it was easily maybe 20 minutes into the movie that you get the stampede, maybe 30.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that long. Like,
Right.
the better portions of the movie, like, if you split it into 2 acts, like, the middle should be right about where the stampede is,
Right.
and then you have him meeting Timon and Pumbaa and all of that, and, like, his whole trip with the monkey. But, like, they condense a lot in there, and they're able to very well, in a very succinct way, establish who these characters are and who they are into relation to each other. So
Right. Well, and this goes back to the themes of this film, which a lot of it has to do with responsibility, right? And what does a leader do, and what does it mean to be responsible in this situation? And in this movie, what you get a lot of is you got this character of Simba who starts off overly brash, right? And overly ambitious, and he wants all of these things from being king in the future, and his father's trying to teach him, hey, there's a lot of responsibility with this that you need to keep in mind. And then once the stampede happens, right, and Mufasa dies, he realizes the consequences, right, of being king, and in some ways completely rejects that. He does the whole Hakuna Matata thing. He goes, I'm going to live my life and not worry about the past and what happened. And that's another way of, once again, not taking responsibility in the right way. And so they kind of deal with the same issue, but deal with different aspects of it at different points in Simba's life. And at the start,
yeah,
it is that very much brash, energetic, I want to live my life my way, and as the boss, I'm going to do things my way. And then in the flip side, it's more of a cowardly, let's run away from our problems, let's stay away from responsibility because we don't want to deal with the consequences that come with that. So it's definitely does a lot of things well with the different stages of Simba's life, exploring a multifaceted issue, even in a kid's movie.
I'm not gonna lie. When I was watching this, I kind of thought of Aragorn a little bit. Um, it's just the Aragorn is very different in his running away, whereas Mufasa, it's almost simplistic and yet very complicated in terms of, like, what's going on in Mufasa's mind. Not
Mm-hmm.
Mufasa, Simba's mind,
Mm-hmm.
because to him it's like, I don't get the sense that he's running away from the responsibility of being king simply because he doesn't want to take responsibility for the position of king. He doesn't want to take responsibility for the actions that he has been led to believe that he took.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that is that he is responsible for his father's death. And so he's carrying this guilt around, and he doesn't want to own up to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting because it's like he's actually not responsible for his father's death, and yet he's been
Right.
convinced he is, and because of this, he runs away.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very consistent with his character, though, because he doesn't want to take responsibility for the things that he's done.
Yeah.
And I mean, he's a kid, and he continues to be a kid. And Timon and Pumbaa all intentions aside, they enable him to continue being a child for the rest of his life that he's with them.
Right. Yep.
And he refuses to take responsibility because it means no worries for the rest of your days. It's a problem-free philosophy. As long as you just swim around and mess around and eat grubs. And I mean, it's very great the way that they do it, because you can tell he has this nagging sort of feeling deep down. And I mean, it again, it is very succinct, because as soon as they end that song, the Hakuna Matata song, they cut to them lying in the bushes, and you can already tell that within like the first 30 seconds of seeing adult Simba out of that song, you can still tell he's feeling that guilt. You can still tell he has that inner conflict going on, because they talk about the stars, and he's like, crap, my dad told me about the stars. And you can already see the wheels turning, and he's like, I remember my dad, and he has to get up and leave. And then you have that interaction with Rafiki, and he's like, I will admit, probably the weirdest part of the movie is that whole weird, like, I don't know, talking to the stars and crap. But I mean, it's a kids movie. They take creative liberties. These are talking lions, so I'll go with it. I mean, they're also taking lots of inspiration from like cultural norms that are like within Africa.
Sure. Right. I mean, he's supposed to be the Rafiki, the monkey, is supposed to be a shaman or a proverbial
Yeah.
shaman in this animal story. So, yeah, you're definitely getting that influence in this film.
Suffice it to say that the purpose of that scene, which is again is not very long, and I'm so glad it wasn't. It all it's meant to do is show Simba coming to terms with the fact that, like, my dad, this is not what he would have wanted. My father taught me these things. And it's kind of like him realizing, like, all the things his dad taught him, like that one snippet when he's talking about the circle of life, when he talks about a king doesn't do everything he can just because he wants to, or when his dad tells him, just because a king is courageous doesn't mean he goes out of his way to start fights. Like, all of these little lessons that Mufasa tells him, and it's done very well. It's just these little short snippets, 1-2 sentences. It's like 5-10 seconds, and they move on. But it's all these little lessons he's been instilling in Simba kind of come flooding back, and he realizes, my dad would have wanted me to take responsibility. My dad would not have wanted me to run, even though he ended up dying to save me. And you kind of have Nala there to kind of, she's kind of the catalyst, really, to kind of push him along. Because her whole character is just like, she's been suffering and she's going through something else entirely. And to be honest, we don't get very much of Nala other than the love scene and then them messing around as kids. But you still get that whole interaction, and
You definitely get a lot of interesting things with him as an adult running away, right? And there is a sense in which you get, especially being adults ourselves, right? Seeing the idea of, oh, it would be nice if I didn't have to deal with the responsibilities of being an adult. Yeah, that'd be awesome. But
yeah,
that part of the idea of being an adult is that you have those responsibilities. And so obviously in his situation, Simba has much greater responsibilities than any of us would because he's leading a kingdom, right? And it's animated, so it's not real, but you know, the idea is still there and present with us. So it's definitely interesting to see how that plays out. And then also, you know, whatever that Rafiki experience is, at the very least,
yeah,
you get boiled down this message, this idea that Simba realizes that his father lives on in how he acts and how he lives his life. And so there's even some idea of legacy then tied into his story here, where he realizes the legacy of my father is tied into how I live my life and how he raised me to be. So how am I then going to carry that forward into the world? And that really makes him, because he has so much reverence and respect for his father and how he raised him, um, it's like that's the final kick in the nuts that gets him to start going. So then that's where he goes back and decides to return to his kingdom and
yeah.
to face Scar and face his past and face the responsibilities of that. So, what was your thoughts on that whole arc of the final confrontation with Scar?
I don't think they explore this very much, which isn't really a problem. But like his
Mm-hmm.
relationship with his uncle, and he really, when you think about it, this is one of his role models. So one of his role models is dead, the other one usurped power, and he realizes, oh, my uncle is actually a piece of crap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now I have to go confront him. And so it's difficult on multiple levels because this is someone he looked up to, and as someone who himself doesn't want to take responsibility, he's probably dealing with a lot of his own insecurities. Now he needs to challenge his uncle for the throne. And
Mm-hmm.
sure, he has the legitimate claim to that throne, um, but he doesn't feel qualified, is the point.
Right.
With this guilt he's carrying around. And there's that scene when he's on the ledge and Scar tells him, I have my own little secret. I killed Mufasa. And then he realizes, wow, my life has been a lie. I've been running
Mm-hmm.
from this when I should have been running towards it. My
Right.
uncle killed my dad, wants me dead, took my father's throne. And it's in that moment that you see that change. And the thing that's so cool about it is you have this shift in Mufasa, right? When he realizes I need to take responsibility. But it's kind of a almost I'm blanking on the word right now. He doesn't want to. It's a hesitance in his taking responsibility. It's almost like out of just necessity he's going to. But in
Mm-hmm.
this moment he realizes, no, this is wrong. This
Mm-hmm.
man should be dead.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and unlike so many movies we see today, it's a shift that's done well. You have the right catalysts, you have things done at the right time, you have the right type of reaction by the protagonist
Mm-hmm.
where he responds in such a way that it's believable to the audience, and then he acts upon that shift in such a way that makes sense. And
Right.
so then the fight that proceeds out of that, ultimately Scar ends up dying in a very gruesome way. He gets devoured by hyenas.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then you have the scene when Mufasa finally takes his place on Pride Rock, and
Mm-hmm.
he stands in the same spot that his father did, and he roars, and kind of it's like the symbol of I am now the king is back.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we're so back.
Yeah, we're so
um,
back, baby.
and like even though this is a kids movie, even watching this as an adult, it's such an epic scene. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you're just like, oh yeah, I would love to stand on top of a rock in the rain and like let my hair flow in the wind, my mane, just be like, yes, oh, this is great.
Explains the long hair, at least.
Hey, I mean, I've got a mane to myself, so I can sympathize with Simba. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it's done great. I think Simba's character is an example of a protagonist done well. He has a complete
Mm-hmm.
arc. He has driving motivations. He has a character shift that's done well. He
Mm-hmm.
reacts. All of his actions fall in line with the way that his character has been built up.
Mm-hmm.
He has a very concrete ending to his story. I myself have never seen the second two Lion King movies, and I don't
Okay.
think I ever really need to. I mean, I've only seen the first one, and to be honest, I think the first one is great on its own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Well, I
I
mean,
mean,
it's
I could
very
be
hard
convinced.
for a
Yeah,
sequel to meet the original. So that's not surprising. But the first one is definitely the best. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
yeah. I mean, I could be convinced to watch the other two. I just have never seen them, and so
Sure.
it's like I don't feel like I'm missing a ton when this movie I think is done so well in so many
Yeah.
ways, and
Yeah.
in some ways is better than most live action movies we get today.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, going back to that shift that you talked about, because we've actually seen a lot of shifts like this, but in the opposite direction in films today. And you see this even in, for example, The Dark Knight with Two-Face, where there's all of this built up, and then there's a sudden revelation to him that shifts everything, where he turns bad. In this case, you have all of this built up where he's really trying to convince himself in some way to take responsibility when he's seen that um, there's so much sorrow and loss in the midst of that experience. And this revelation that he's not responsible for it changes everything for him. And it changes him in the right direction. That, yes, I should have been taking responsibility this entire time. And causes him to become the leader that he was always called to be. So
Yeah.
it's definitely interesting to see that play out toward the good side. And it's very well done. Yeah, I would agree. I think I have a little bit of a minor beef with how Scar was like just chortling over him, and then the lion can just like utterly punk him off the edge of a cliff to now he's on top of his enemy. Seems a little questionable, but you know what? I'm not going to question it too much because it's a kid's movie, and like, what are we talking about here? It's, it's all good. So, um,
I mean,
anyways,
I also seeing that scene thought about it, and I was like, well, why didn't Mufasa do that?
yeah, exactly.
But
Mad facts.
it's just meant, it all in my mind is meant to represent is them showing that shift in his character.
Mm-hmm. Right.
To taking control of the situation in a proactive way.
Right, and it's both visually true and then audibly true as he sees this, and he goes from being on the bottom, on the edge of the cliff, barely holding on, to being the one on top of his enemy, realizing he's in control. And you
Yes.
see this like metaphorical aspect of the film is very strong in many ways, and you see this even at the very end, where it's like this land was in a drought, and what happens when the king returns? The rains fall upon Africa and everything grows back and becomes nice and green again, right? We come out of the drought because the man has taken responsibility and is now leading the kingdom that he was called to lead from the beginning of the film. So
Yeah.
it's they do very well with the symbolism, even in the small things, and you gotta appreciate it from being a
yeah.
cinephile. So at this point, it might be appropriate now that we've just kind of poked at Scar a little bit to give him the full rundown. What were your thoughts on the development of the villain in this film, Scar?
I think Scar's character is great. Not bringing in anything with the new Mufasa movie, which is clearly going to explore Mufasa and Scar's previous relationship.
Right.
But Scar is very much this character that is kind of he's sour about the way his life is. He's become embittered and vindictive, and he is entitled. He believes that the throne is his, and he ought to be king, and that he'd do a better job than Mufasa. And you get this in little lines, again, very succinct, but also very telling. And you often don't even recognize that it's like this subconscious, like, information gap filler for you as the audience. Like when he first meets Mufasa, and he says, I was given the brains and he was given the brawn, pretty much. And it's
Right.
kind of this innuendo to, I could run a kingdom better, but because he's bigger than me, he's in charge. And then you have his musical score, which is honestly probably like my favorite part of the movie. With the hyenas. He's very much the politician. Okay, like
Right.
he very much plays every side, and it ultimately comes to bite him in the butt in the end, quite literally. And
Nice.
so, you're welcome. He is very devious. He takes advantage of the fact that Simba looks up to him. But in the end, I think they do a good job of showing like he wasn't meant to be king. He doesn't have the same thing that Mufasa had instilled in him about this is how you ought to be running a kingdom.
Right.
He doesn't have what it takes. He is very much what Simba would have been without Mufasa's guidance, which is what I think makes him such an interesting villain. Because Simba sees the throne as power. You can do whatever you want. And Scar is the termination of that. He is the adult who's been given that power, and yet he has none of the good morals and ideas that have been instilled in Simba by Mufasa, which is why I think he's such a good counter to Simba, because he represents what Simba would have been. And so I think Scar's a great character. Granted, you don't get to see like a ton of like his character development because, again, he's the villain, so he doesn't really have an arc other than he stays bad and then he dies.
Right.
But I think he does make a good foil to Simba's character.
Right, and that's the real question: is like, are you trying to present a different, and this is something just interesting going into themes, right? Where what is the purpose of the villain? Because the villain is supposed to counter the protagonist, right? But is he supposed to do it in a way where he is anti the value that he represents thematically, or is he supposed to represent a completely different value that is in some ways opposed to the one value? And I think that especially if you have a different value that he represents, you want more of that development. But in this case, he is the foil, right? He is the one who is, this is what it looks like to hold to child Simba's values and what that terminates into. So it's definitely appropriate for what you see. And also, it's a kid's movie. It's an hour and a half long, and you're getting everything very tightly woven together. So I would say that Scar, in my mind, as much as I enjoy him as a villain, he's not got a ton of nuance, and that's intentional. And he's not really, I mean, the most nuanced it is that he's duping a kid into doing what he wants, right? And he's not even like blatant about that most of the time until the very point where he tells him to run away because his father died. So, even with that, he's not too bad, not too shabby at all. But it is important to note that he is very much just a counter to the values that Simba is exploring in this film, which is great. It works out super well, and it's well developed for Simba's part, and that's the purpose it held. Great. I mean, I have nothing else to add on to with Scar other than his teeth and ambitions are bared. So,
be prepared.
Yeah, we're prepared to talk about Mufasa now. Probably the last important character, unless you want to talk about Timon and Pumbaa and Nala and all them. But Mufasa specifically,
we can kind of talk about all of them all at once, to be honest. But
you mentioned a little bit about Mufasa earlier on with his character being this fatherly figure that Simba sees, and just how he's trying to teach his child the responsibilities around that. I don't know if there was more you even wanted to add to that, because he only has, 4 or 5 scenes total in the entire film.
I mean, when I think of Mufasa, I think of Qui-Gon Jinn. That is the character I'm envisioning.
And that's a big compliment for Andrew, because he loves Qui-Gon Jinn.
I do. He's very much this character who has this protege, this child that is going to take on a lot of responsibility one day. Mm-hmm. And he knows he won't be here all the time to guide this child. Mm-hmm. And so he's trying to take every opportunity to imbue these lessons into this child. Mm-hmm. And he does it in a very loving, kind way, but very stern, like with a firm grasp on this child. And he's very open and honest about it, but he's also very playful about it. I mean, granted, they are cats, but, in terms of, like, how a father figure ought to behave around kids, I mean, I think it's a very good representation of what a healthy relationship ought to look like. And so Mufasa's character isn't meant to have flaws. He isn't the main character. He is meant to be that rock that gets ripped away from Simba to cause him to struggle, to give us the plot that is this movie. But I think Mufasa's character is a great one. I mean, he is the representation of the ultimate good guy, if you will, in the father figure position. Right. And so whereas some movies make the father figure the struggle for the child to come to terms with, Mufasa was the thing that kind of kept Simba on the right path. Right. And so I think they do him very well. Again, they don't give him many scenes, but the few scenes that they have are all used very, very well and efficiently.
Yeah. He is the ideal that they're supposed to strive for, which, if you know anything about plot structure, it's not surprising that they killed the ideal off. But, it's definitely important for the sake of our purposes, is like, we know what Simba should be doing. Why? Because we saw it on screen with his father. And so him embodying all that for him means that he has a high bar to be held to. And, it's a lot of expectation, but he's supposed to fulfill it. Why? Because it's his responsibility as the son of the king to step into those shoes, especially when his father dies. So,
yeah,
great character. I have no beef with him either. What are your thoughts on all the other side characters in this film?
Oh, I did want to say something else about Mufasa.
Sure.
And that is, when you're thinking about what does Mufasa represent, I think it is... Just as a side note, it is important to recognize when Simba's thinking of his dad, right? What are the quality traits that he thinks he ought to emulate? Then you think, okay, what quality traits were shown
Mm-hmm.
in the movie? You get the selflessness that Mufasa just without question jumps into that stampede to save his son, throwing aside all doubts about, well, what if I die? What if I don't survive? That he has put his son above his entire kingdom in that moment, and it's this selflessness that he's showing. There's the firm grasp that he has on, like, you should not be doing these things. He's courageous, he's caring, he's kind, he's loving, he's generous, he's forgiving of his uncle. These are all traits that are, like, to Simba are overwhelming. But I think they just do a very good job of showing so much in so little time, which again is why I think this movie is just so good, because again, you get like 3 scenes and you get all of these different character traits that are shown in Mufasa.
Yeah, 100%.
On to like the other characters. I mean, Timon and Pumbaa are the classic guy friend group who lose a friend to a girl, and they have the song where they're like, we're doomed. Yep. No. And like the conversation when they first meet her, they're like, wait a minute. So you're friends and she's trying to eat him and you're okay with it.
Right. Yep.
And they're good comedic relief. I don't know that they really have an arc. I think they serve their purpose. I think they're good comedic relief. They're not like the stupid kind of comedic relief.
No.
They have their own reasons for being there. They don't really want to take responsibility themselves. But in terms of themes of this movie, I think that the theme of taking responsibility is a very powerful one. And I think that even Timon and Pumbaa kind of help emulate that, in that they don't really think of themselves as being responsible individuals. And then they realize, wait a minute, our friend Simba is going to challenge his uncle. And they show up for their friend. And they're like, hey, we don't like taking responsibility a lot of the time, but we've got our friends' backs. And like, whereas it was just them before and they're constantly together, they're like, you have been added to our little group and now we're a trio and you're our friend and we're here to help. Right. So I think even in their own small way, they kind of showed this kind of element of responsibility that the movie is trying to push.
Right. Well, and even you see that, like, from the beginning, they are very much looking at Simba not as a friend, but as an asset, a tool to use to protect themselves, because what if he's on our side, right? And so
I think
like
Timon is, but Pumbaa is very much just like, he's a cute little lion cub.
Right.
He's adorable.
I mean, yeah.
But yeah.
Anyways, I mean, they're both, and they're obviously like jokesters. They're not super serious characters. But within that, you see they're even preaching this doctrine of irresponsibility to Simba, and they go, as fun as Hakuna Matata is, it is the antithesis of the message that they're trying to tell in this story, where they're going like, just chill out, bro. Don't think about the past. Don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. Just run away and do your own thing. You'll be fine, right? And as much as he embraces that for a minute, he still can't forget the past. And then when Nala shows up and goes, hey, we need your help, he realizes that he has to reject that doctrine and go back to an idea of responsibility. And the cool thing is, like you said, Timon and Pumbaa go with him. They realize, yeah, they have responsibilities to their friend that they care about. They're going to help him to do what he needs to do as the leader of the kingdom of Pride Rock. So, yeah, even within that, they do pretty well. They're great characters, and in their own way, they also tell the story. So, love it.
Yeah. I can't really think of too many other characters. I mean, Nala is a character who's very much a child and had a very different upbringing than Simba, and her upbringing was like, we're waiting for the return of a king almost, and it's almost like a hopeless one too, because it's just like this hopeless existence she has. She's a good side character. I mean, I don't think she needs much discussing, to be honest.
No. She's the friend who becomes the romantic interest, who is the catalyst for pushing Simba into the future, right? And that gets him to accept his responsibility along with Rafiki. So yeah, I mean, there's and all of the side characters don't need to be complex. I personally appreciate complex side characters because I think they can add a lot to a film. But at the same time, there's some amazing films that have little to no side characters. I mean, talk about Ex Machina, which we reviewed way earlier on this podcast. That's one that has like almost no side characters at all. It's got like 2 people total in the film. You can argue the as the third one, but whatever. There's basically nobody to interact with, so you don't need complex side characters, and these ones were developed well enough to create a compelling story. No issues. But the film's still around, right? It's been 30 years, and here we are reviewing The Lion King. What are your thoughts on the lasting impact of this film? Because clearly it has lasted.
I mean, when I think about this film, I think of the two themes that I think are pushed the strongest, and that's of loyalty and responsibility. And you have the themes of loyalty even with the hyenas,
Right.
where when Scar betrays them, they're like, "Oh, that's not cool, bro." Whereas the beginning of the film, like they're loyal to him. They don't care. Like he's they'll follow him. You have the
Old
themes
buddy,
of
old pal.
loyalty. Yeah. Oh, Scar, old buddy, old pal. You've got the themes of loyalty in Zazu. You've got the
Right.
themes of loyalty in the female lionesses and Nala, in Timon and Pumbaa, and even Simba. It's this ideal that's being presented in the movie as a good thing, and same thing with taking responsibility either for your actions or for what you ought to be doing in life. And so I think this movie has very good messages and themes. It's done in a very good way. I think in terms of lasting impact, I don't know. Clearly, Disney didn't learn from this movie because they're kind of regressing at this point. But
I mean, we'll even see if Mufasa, the film, which at this point will have already released, so you'll have to come to this after the Mufasa movie, but
yeah,
like if it even has the same themes at all. Is this going to create the origins of how Mufasa learned the lessons that taught him to be a leader and responsible in the same way that he then tries to pass on to his son in this film, the original The Lion King? Or is it going to go some completely dubious, nuanced, who knows where area? Probably, considering Disney.
yeah. Let's just put it this way: if Mufasa does anything that changes the way that the Lion King is perceived, it's a bad movie. Because the Lion King's great on its own, and all Mufasa can do is add on to that. At this point, any sort of change to the Lion King is going to be a detriment. Which unfortunately is what Disney loves to do, is change older projects, and it's like, why are you messing with it? It's not broken. You don't need to fix it.
Right.
This is a phenomenal movie. It got a 7.7 from me, which is a lot. It got a 7.45 from Maverick, which is again a lot.
Right. Yeah. We've not been giving those out recently.
No, we have not. Like with Joker 2, oh dear Lord.
Yeah. It's a rough look.
It is indeed.
Nice. Well, any last parting thoughts you want to leave the audience with for this film?
I don't know. Would you change your rating?
Not really. I mean, I am curious because we've pretty much just loved on this film. Like, this is an incredible film, and there's a reason for it. Why didn't it get a perfect 9 for you?
I was thinking the same thing. Like when I'm looking through the questionnaire, you have the 9 points, right? There were some of the questions where I'm thinking about it. I think that was what it was. The revelations.
Right.
There was a revolution in this movie that changed everything. I didn't feel like I could give it full points because it wasn't like a plot twist to the audience.
Right.
It was more of a revelation to Simba that, oh crap, I'm not responsible for my dad's death. So it got points for it, but it didn't get full points because it's not like there was this massive plot twist where it was like, oh, actually Mufasa committed suicide.
Right. Well, and it's like, and that's an important point because the revelations aspect is how you get like a great film, an awesome film, like a solid 8 to a 9. Those super memorable things that you'll never forget type ones are the ones that have those amazing revelations. And the question is, how do you pull that off? And part of that is nuanced, right? Two ways. One, does it affect the plot fundamentally in a way that changes things? In this case, it did, right? So it should deserve points there. But are the audience impacted by that? We as the audience knew from the beginning that Scar was the bad guy, and we saw him kill Mufasa. So we know it's not Simba's fault. Even though Simba doesn't know that, it still fundamentally changes how Simba interacts, but it doesn't change anything for us as the audience. It's just Simba catching up to where we already are. So that totally makes sense. And like that, if they had changed that in some way, I don't know that I would mess with Lion King, right? Because I love this film. I think it's amazing. But like, just hypothetically, could they have created the revelation in a way that we didn't know that Scar killed Mufasa in that moment? Maybe. And that probably would have actually made that revelation much more surprising for us if they revealed it in that moment.
Yeah. Another place that didn't get full points was the heightened tensions. On the ratings, it says the greatest I've ever seen, and it's like, yeah, I mean, it was good, but I don't know if I'd say it's the greatest I've ever seen.
Right.
So there were a few places that didn't get full points. I mean, a 7.7 is pretty close to an 8, so I still gave it a good chunk of points there.
Yeah.
So.
No, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, this is a solid film.
Yeah. No, and like, especially for heightening the tension, right? Kids movie is probably not going to have that as much because you're not trying to make a kid like lose their mind about, oh my goodness, I think everyone's going to die. But there is a sense in which the thrillers that really do this heightened tension out of the frying pan into the fire type scenario and do it really well are the ones that get super high points in that scale. Most other movies probably are going to lose just a little bit, and this one did lose a little bit there. And that's fine. Like, it's not going to... Just being realistic with it, it's an amazing movie. It deserves the rating it got. But that doesn't mean that it's perfect. So, you know. And this is purely plot-wise. So, you know what? Never mind. I'm not going to defend myself. This is. I still like this movie. The qualms I have with it are like minor, nuanced, and I think that's reflected in the rating. So that's what it got. So that's the pod. We hope you all enjoyed. We will be back as we always are next week. We'll see you all then.